Okay, welcome everyone to week seven's lecture. This week we're talking about ethics in policing. And um, yeah, I don't know any other better way to say this. Truly, this subject itself could be an entire class. Um, like it could be an entire 8 week or 16-week long course just on ethics in policing. So obviously, we don't have that amount of time. So we're going to touch on some of the high level things. We're going to talk about a couple ethical theories, and we're going to talk about it at the broad level. Okay, so what we're talking about here and what's here, that'll be what's on the test. That'll be what's relevant to you. But obviously, like I said, ethics in policing, number one, could be its own class. But number two, ethics itself could be its own class. There's so much to actually dive into and discuss what ethics is. So, that being said, we're going to get a little bit into that first, and then we'll dive into ethics in policing. So, what is ethics? If you Google ethics, legitimately the answer that comes up is moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So, what are ethics? It's a person's personalized individual morals. That's it. If we broke it down to the simplest terms, ethics is an individual's personalized morals. Okay? But that leads to the question that not everybody can answer: what are morals? And again, if you Google, morals are a person's standards of behavior or beliefs concerning what is and is not acceptable for them to do. So, morals are what's right and what's wrong. And so, really, the discussion about ethics is understanding the way people operate and how people view the concepts of right and wrong. That's very basic. That's if anyone ever said, "What's ethics about?" It's about the discussion of what is right and what is wrong for individuals. That's the answer. It's There's a lot of nuance and layers to this. Like I said, we could do an entire class just on ethics. That's kind of the nature of it. And I will tell you, if you do go on to a 4 year degree at any other institution, typically you have to take an ethics class, and it's usually like a 300, 400 level ethics. It's a semester long class that does exactly what I'm talking about. So that's why I say you can do an entire class. I've done more than one class on ethics. So, like, personally, as a student, I had more than one class on ethics. I'm familiar with this stuff. But you might have heard of moral dilemmas. You might have heard of the term moral panic, ethical dilemma. All these terms you might have heard before, and they're all related to the same concept of problems that are right or wrong, or rather, questions and what if scenarios that there is no right answer to. And I want to emphasize that before we dive any deeper into our discussion of ethics specifically within policing. And I guess that kind of plays directly into my question: why does this matter? So, if there's no right answer to ethics and morals, why are we even talking about it? So, if you go back and you remember what we've talked about before, criminal justice and policing is a social science. It means that you work with people, you work with other individuals. Everyone has their own sense of right and wrong, beliefs, whether religious or personal, spiritual, whatever you want to say. People have different viewpoints. And so understanding that morals and ethics are not all black and white is an important aspect of any job or any role where you are communicating with other people, because other people might have a different opinion, other people might have a different idea, and so it's important to understand where the other side comes from. And that's what I'm trying to get at with this. I'm going to talk specifically in a little bit about why it's relevant for policing, because we're going to look at those. But why should you care about ethics and morals as just a regular person, even if you're not going into criminal justice or policing? Because it's how we communicate as people. It's how we have a fair and equal society when we actually do. Like, legitimately understanding ethics and morals helps you understand the chaotic nature of the universe and society and how people don't always see eye to eye. Being able to see something from another person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it, is a step towards understanding and acceptance. It's a step towards peaceful negotiations. And if we're going back to stuff we talked about with policing, understanding that kind of peaceful negotiations thing, that's the key to working with a group of people who may not agree that the police are a force of good. Okay? So, ethics matters because everybody has a level of morals and ethics. Even if you're someone who believes that every single criminal should be killed, that's a moral belief. Even if you believe that nobody deserves to be killed, that's a moral belief. There's a root to it. And so, just understand that people might not have the same viewpoint as you. Okay? So, we're going to talk about a couple different key theories. So I'll tell you right now, we're going to talk about 5 in particular. Today, we're going to focus on the 5. Those are going to be the 5 that will appear on the final exam. They'll be the ones that are relevant to your discussion and your success in the class. Not that these are the only 5. There are plenty others. And the textbook does go into other ones, but these are the 5 that I want to highlight for you for our class, because they tend to be the 5 broad stroke ones. So the first one we've talked about before, utilitarianism. We talked about Jeremy Bentham and utilitarianism, and we also saw, the development of the opticon, or the panopticon, sorry, not the opticon, the panopticon, where if you believe you're under constant surveillance, you'll do good. Well, that's because the tenets of utilitarianism, which we didn't really get into then, we talked very briefly about. But utilitarianism is, the concept of it is the idea of maximizing pleasure over pain. Okay? And so how that relates to criminal justice is that the punishment for the crime is enough of a pain or enough of a deterrent that to achieve that same pleasure that they get from committing the crime. Bless you. Whew, sorry, me, whatever. But in utilitarianism and policing, a criminal is not going to commit a crime because the punishment is so severe that they would rather maximize their pleasure over the pain. So how that looks in law enforcement, like we already said, is the idea that laws are designed for the general best outcome for the best normal number of people. The idea that the vast majority, the utilitarianism, the utility of the large group. But the further point that I guess, and I wanted to emphasize, our text does have these kind of questions, and I literally copied and pasted the questions right in here. So the question, how can utilitarian theory assist law enforcement in moral dilemmas? And so this is where I say, what's a moral dilemma? And going with what we were defining earlier, a moral dilemma is a dilemma or a problem that comes down to a person's individualized beliefs in what's right and what's wrong. And so our textbook, which is from 2012, so it's a little outdated, talks about, again, also it's Canadian, but it talks about the rising interest in marijuana legalization. And this is still something that's relevant here in the United States today. We have made it at the national level for medicinal, but recreational is still a state-by-state issue. Well, here comes an actual legitimate problem. So how should an officer approach in a state where marijuana is not legalized for anything other than medical use? Do they decide to follow the law as written and arrest them and charge them and put them in prison for whatever the set is for that particular state? Or do they notice that there is a push in the local government and the state that they're in, that they're trying to get recreational legalized and it's not really the issue, and the person that you are set to charge with marijuana possession is actually, that's the only problem. They weren't causing any other crime. So do you charge them still, or do you let them go? Because remember, police power, they have discretion. Police officers are given a certain level of discretion when dealing with the public. They have the power to choose to pursue a crime, to charge a crime, to give a warning, whatever that may be. That is within their rights. That's within their power as police officers. And so, understanding utilitarian theory, discretion in marijuana possession cases. If the large majority of that community is supportive of legalizing recreational use of marijuana, will that officer charge the person as harshly, or will they give them a warning? Well, they might use their discretion and say, yeah, we're moving towards legalizing it. I'll just give you a warning. Just be careful next time. Or they could see, well, while some people are for it, it really isn't helpful to the community, so I'm going to charge it. Legitimately, this is the problem, and I will tell you right now, I've talked about this in criminal law class before, but I'm going to talk about it here. Much like judges and lawyers and juries, police officers are human. Humans make choices. You can't control what they do. There are rules to follow, but not everybody follows the rules to a T. So there's a lot of wiggle room. So we're talking hypotheticals, okay? Not actual cases. We're talking hypotheticals right now. All that we're going to talk about with the different theories, we're going to be talking about in hypotheticals, okay? So there are any number of factors that could be different. I'm just trying to give you a basic understanding of these ethical theories and potential issues within criminal justice. Okay. So utilitarianism ends up coming down to the big emphasis that it has on policing is it's the open discretion for police officers to engage with others. The issue, though, and not to say this is the only issue, but how do you measure or value one's enjoyment or pain over another? So in considering utilitarianism is about maximizing pleasure over pain, or the punishment is severe enough that nobody will want to do it, how do you compare one person to another? How do you view one person's personal life to another in terms of likelihood of committing a crime? Going to our hypothetical of discretion in a marijuana possession case, like I said, the only charge is marijuana possession. No violence, no weapons, nothing. It's just they have marijuana possession. Just over the legal limit if it's in a state that's legal. How do you determine which person gets the fine and what person gets the warning? What person gets arrested, what person does not? This is the challenge to utilitarianism, is how do you figure out which person is going to not commit a crime, or how do you determine what group is right and what group is not? What has the higher right and the higher wrong? So, something to think about. So, we're going to talk about another one. This is deontology. This comes from Immanuel Kant. K-A-N-T is pronounced Kant. It's also sometimes known as Kantian Kantian ethics. And the very basic breakdown of deontology is everyone has a moral duty. And this comes down to this concept that there are universally agreed upon actions that are good or bad. Okay? There are universal actions that are good or bad. So deontology says, yeah, kicking a puppy, that's a bad thing. That's morally bad. Everyone agrees with that, universally. Nobody thinks kicking a puppy is a good thing. And on the other hand, universally speaking, everyone agrees that, life is sacred. Whether you agree with that or not, life is sacred. Life needs to be cherished. Okay, you got these two. Great. So the question is, how can we take that idea that there are universally accepted moral goods and bads into law enforcement? Well, we can go back to marijuana possession arrests as an example, and we will, but we can also look at public perception of traffic stops. So, again, these are all hypothetical. What is general public perception of a traffic stop where a police officer pulls over an individual who is driving their vehicle to stop and talk with them over suspicion of a crime? What's the wrong in that? Is there anything morally wrong with stopping someone who is suspiciously acting like they could commit a crime? And I'm asking this in a very intentional way. Is there anything morally wrong with stopping a person who seems suspicious of committing a crime? Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to leave that up to you. Is it morally okay to stop someone of color who's driving a nice vehicle? The immediate answer should be no. That shouldn't be even a question. But there's a legitimate issue where we do see some of the data shows that there is a bias in general towards people of color, especially African American, who, when driving a nice vehicle or in a predominantly white area, get pulled over for routine traffic stops. Something seems suspicious. Is that morally right? No, that's not right. There's an issue of human mistake and human error there. But going to marijuana arrests again, is it morally right to possess marijuana for your own use? Is it morally wrong to possess marijuana for your own use? I'm going to give you a hint to the correct answer. There is no correct answer to this question. That's ethics. Ethics is there's not a simple answer. Marijuana arrests are a complicated matter, and I specifically put it with public perceptions because we have a decent amount of information and data from the last 40 to 50 years that shows us that in our prisons right now, a good majority of marijuana possession cases who are people who are incarcerated for marijuana possession. I want to emphasize, not for other violent crimes or anything, but for marijuana possession or selling of marijuana, not other drugs, marijuana, is predominantly Latino and African American. There's a disproportionate number of people of color who are arrested for those crimes. Or rather, there's a disproportionately large number of those who are still incarcerated for those crimes when others are no longer being incarcerated. Is there a universal right or wrong in that situation? Is it morally, universally agreed upon right or universally wrong to sell marijuana, to own marijuana, to possess marijuana, to smoke marijuana? And I want to emphasize, This is not an answer that you can actually answer, at least not simply. This is a complicated matter. So, what are the issues with deontology in policing? And in general, well, what are universal goods and bads? What are universal goods? What are universal bads? Like, I can't emphasize this enough. Deontology likes to paint the world as black and white as possible. But we've talked about in this class, the world isn't black and white. Criminal justice in policing is not black and white. It tries to be, but it cannot. One of the big issues with deontology is what are universal goods and what are universal bads. But the other side to this, and I want to emphasize this, what does equity look like? What does equalness look like? If we agree that there are universal rights and universal wrongs, it means that everybody has a moral duty to act for good or for bad. If everyone is morally going to act for the good, does that mean that anyone who acts that's morally bad is all equally bad? If someone who assaults a child, are they just as bad as someone who steals a car? Are they just as bad as someone who stole someone's property from their home? Are they just as bad as someone who killed an old lady? Are they just as bad as someone who sold illegal drugs? Part of this is that everyone has a moral duty. If everyone acts towards good, what does equity look like? So, kind of an extension on deontology, we talk about the concept of natural law. And natural law does come from St. Thomas Aquinas, but it's this concept that takes deontology to the next level, and that's that humans are inherently good and we strive for good. Like, our whole thing is we want to do good. Humans are flawed creatures, but we are inherently good and strive for good. There is an opposite. There is more egoism where we all just kind of do whatever we want because we like it and because it feels good. And like legitimately, there is plenty of other arguments for this. But understanding the concept of natural law, that humans are inherently good and are going to strive for good things, how can we view this in criminal justice? Well, how about the use of force, the use of power in apprehending a suspect? If humans are inherently good, is all use of force totally okay in every situation? Is it okay for officers to pursue a potential criminal and use whatever force is necessary to stop them? Is it inherently good for an officer to use their power as an influence over a individual through interrogation during an investigation? If any of those questions made you think maybe not, that's this ethical dilemma to a T. It's not black and white. It's not. This is not simple stuff. So, really, the issues here are what is good, what is natural. How do you define good? I guess my second follow-up point to this that really kind of circles back on the other things we've already talked about. What does good mean to you? What does good mean to you versus what does good mean to someone else? So, this one, social contract theory, comes from Thomas Hobbes, and this one is very much not like natural law. It's kind of like the opposite. It still believes in the concept of good, but the difference is instead of it being what guides humans, it's more of, and I'll just dive into it. So Hobbes put forward the idea that social contract theory is that society without laws and rules is chaos and natural. The natural human state is chaos. We are not beings created for good. We are just chaotic beings that like to do whatever feels right. We're the basic impulse. That's where I referenced egoism a little bit, and the text does talk about egoism, but we're not focusing on egoism. The idea that the individual person makes decisions based off what they want to do. Basic human instinct is to do what we want to do, what feels good. Hobbes believed that humans are flawed beings that will do whatever they want. However, that's where I say it's not quite the opposite of natural law, but it's the opposite of natural law. Hobbes put forward the idea that we as people, as humans, create rules and laws to prevent our basic instincts from coming out. We make rules and laws so that we follow them, so that we don't rely on our base instincts. We make rules that say you don't kill someone, so that we don't act on that deep primeval desire to kill someone. If you're a religious person and you know anything about the Christian Bible, the Jewish Torah, or the Islamic Quran, in the early books, they're all Abrahamic religions. They all come from the same base area. There's a story of Cain and Abel. Abel is the younger son and the one that God smiles upon, and Cain is jealous and he kills his brother. Like literally, we start the religious books with killing your brother. I mean, it's the second or third story in, but the idea is, yeah, people are flawed. One of our base instincts is to kill. One of our base instincts is to cause harm, is to do things that we like. So the idea for Hobbes is, hey, yeah, we're all terrible beings, but we make rules so that we don't let that happen. And so, really, this is where I'm going to put forward how does social contract theory work in law enforcement? Well, why does the law exist in the first place? And I'm going to leave you with that question for this. I'm going to talk something else related, but why do the laws exist in the first place? I want you to think about that. There is an answer and there is a history to it. So social contract theory in practice and in understanding for specifically policing and criminal justice is understanding that the ways that we set out and make rules in our society, whether that's at the local level, like local ordinances and laws, or if it's the state level or the federal level, which again are laws, or if you're not even in the United States, if it's another country, everywhere has rules. That's a weird reality of societies, that they typically have rules. Even anarchy, as weird as that is, anarchy is about the destruction of the pre-established notions, but even in revolution and anarchy, there tends to arise a new set of rules. It's just kind of the weird thing that humans are about. So social contract theory is something that you see all the time, and as policing, like, or in criminal justice or any part of the CJ field, social contract theory is really one of the bases of trying to understand why people commit crimes, why people do things the way they do. Why does a criminal choose to recidivate, and even though they've gone through corrections, they now are coming back to prison? Well, why did they do that? What circumstances led them to be there in the first place? Is it a law that they don't understand? Is it a law that's unfairly weighed against them? What is causing this to happen? So there's a lot to think about with social contract theory. So one of the big issues, and I'm again asking you this question, and this question, it has a direct answer. I'll tell you that now. Are humans simple beings with simple motivations? There is a right answer to this question. Are humans simple beings with simple motivations? The answer is no. Are there people who have very simple motivations? Yes, there are simple motivations out there all the time. But are humans a simple thing? One-sided, really easy to understand beings with simple motivations and understanding? He ate hot dog because he was hungry. Or is there more nuance? Is there more data? He ate a hot dog because he was hungry, and it was the only thing that was in the fridge because he hadn't gone shopping yet. Now there's more. It's not simple motivation. It's not just he ate hot dog because he's hungry. Well, he ate a hot dog because he was hungry, but out of necessity, that was his option. He killed person because he didn't like person. Is that the crux of it? No. There's usually more nuance. Why did he kill the person? Well, there might have been several reasons. He may not have liked them, but there might have been more than just one reason why. The big issue with social contract theory is that it tries to boil down all the complexities of human nature and human society and say, we make rules so that we follow rules. But the opposite of this is exactly true. And you talk to anyone, especially for those of my students who are older or have children, especially teenagers. Teenagers love to fight and go against authority all the time. Heck, if you have a toddler, toddlers push their limits all the time. Social contract theory believes that we have rules in place because we will follow them because we need to go against our basic primal instincts. But don't people also go against the rules? Don't people intentionally want to break rules? Yeah, there's a problem there. It's not a simple black and white thing. That's why I say, are human beings simple with simple motivations? No, it's more complex. Okay, and so the last main one that I want to talk about with you today is moral relativity. And this is a larger group of ethics than the other ones. So for emphasis, I'm going back to the first one. Utilitarianism is a specific section of ethics. It looks at this concept of people respond to the way that they experience the world. They go in with what they like and they avoid things they don't like. Deontology is, again, this focus group on people believe in this idea that there are right and wrong things. Usually it's based, I will tell you right now, deontology tends to be based in a lot of religious belief. People agree with the ethics of their own religion, so there's right and there's wrong. It's easily made for them. Natural law, that's another group of ethics that looks at people will follow the natural way of life, and the natural way of life is we are good. We want to be good for society. Social contract theory and Hobbes is like, yeah, I agree with you, except the opposite. People are terrible, so we created rules so that we follow them. All of these looked at very particular areas of human development and nature. Moral relativity is looking at not just those like little camps, but it's looking at all of them together. So our text talks about it as a meta-ethics, looking at the study of ethics and the larger nature that it is. And so moral relativity is a particular field, but it looks at a broad area of ethics, okay? And so moral relativity, in case you can't tell by the words and the context clues, the idea is that morals are constructed by individuals and agreed upon by people with similar understandings and beliefs. In other words, people will group together. People will group together with people who agree with the way they see things. The other thing, and this is where relativity comes in. Morals is relative. What might be morally acceptable to you might not be morally acceptable to me, and vice versa. The concept of moral relativity is that people will disagree about morals. Everybody has their own view. Everybody has their own way of engaging with ethics and morality. Everybody will approach these things differently because everyone constructs these ideas themselves. And once they develop their ideas, they tend to group and cluster with people who have similar ideas. So, yes, you might have a group of friends and you all might agree fully on one moral, ethical, personal belief. That's very possible. But it's also possible that within your own group, you're going to find morals that you disagree on. This is actually a big thing with religious communities. Religion is big on giving a set of morals and guidelines for living for their people, for their everyone who believes in that faith. But within that larger group, there are different sections of people that have different beliefs and morals. A good example of this, and we're not diving into it, but a good example if you want to talk about this, is talking about abortion rights with anyone who is of any kind of Christian or Catholic background. Because there's a basic belief within Christianity that all life is sacred, which means you don't take another person's life. However, moral relativity within that religious belief, there are people who will completely agree and say, yep, that means that abortion is wrong. But there are also people who will say, well, abortion is not wrong in these circumstances. There are examples of when it's not okay, and examples of when it is okay. And there might be other groups that say, well, in that same case, technically, a fetus isn't a living thing. It's not born until it's born, and so it's not a person. So any abortion's okay until they are physically born. And there might be another group that says, hey, you know what? Morally speaking, if it's not right to take someone's life, that means I don't agree with the death penalty. We shouldn't be killing anyone. Moral relativity. Human beings are so nuanced and so crazy and so disagreeing on things, but will agree on larger portions that you can't dive into it and expect it to be a simple, easy thing. Everyone has their own relative set of morals. We might agree on large areas, we might agree on small areas, but it's all relative. It's all related to the individual and how they view it. So, moral relativity in a nutshell. So the question, how can moral relativity assist law enforcement in moral dilemmas? Well, I'm going to leave you with a question. And again, not answering this, but I'm going to make you think about it. Thinking about discretion, police discretion in particular, I feel like is the best way to talk about moral relativity. That's my hint to you. Think about police discretion. How is police discretion something that can be understood as moral relativity? Or rather, how can moral relativity impact an officer's ability to use discretion? Hint, hint, that might be an essay question on the final exam. I might ask you to think about moral relativity as it relates to police use of discretion. And to not leave you totally in a lurch without an answer, let me talk a little bit through this. I've talked about how morals are relative and everyone has their own personal belief. How can understanding that personal beliefs and the way people view right and wrong and ethics, how can that be related to police use of discretion? There is the one side that police officers are people In using discretion, they are using moral relativity. They are considering what their own morals are compared to what the standard base of laws are. They are thinking about what is their belief of right and wrong and how to go forward with arrest, warning, fine, whatever it might be for a particular crime. Let me also put forward a what-if scenario. If a police officer is engaging with a young man who is not responding to their verbal requests to lay down on the ground, they're making loud noises and they seem disheveled and upset, and they don't seem to be comprehending what the officer is saying. How can the officer use moral relativity to engage with that particular person? That's going to be a little hint at what you can think about for week 8 with special populations, and how police engage with different groups of people who have different backgrounds and different requirements. I can't just give you the answer, because unfortunately ethics is a game of questions with no answers. I said it already before, and I just said it there. I'm going to emphasize it again. Ethics is a game of questions with no answers. These are, if you have friends or family that love to talk and love to think big ideas, get into moral debates, get into ethical discussions. Just be careful, because sometimes people get really upset about them, but I will tell you right now, I do these with my friends all the time. My best friends and I, we have lots of moral and ethical debates in our friends group all the time. And while some people are like, that's really boring, we have a lot of fun doing it. All of us, except for the one, are college graduates. I'm the only one with a master's, but we all went to similar high schools. We all had similar college experiences, so we all like talking about ethics. That's just who we are. But not everybody does, so I'm just saying. Anyway, so what are some issues with moral relativity? Well, how can a difference in personal morals and ethics impact the interpretation of a written law or of society? Think about that. How can a difference in personal morals and ethics impact the interpretation of a written law of society? And again, I choose my words very carefully. When I do these presentations, when I do these lectures, I choose my words carefully. When I create exams, when I create assignments, I choose my words carefully. How can a difference in personal morals and ethics impact the interpretation of a written law of society? This is a question that doesn't have a direct answer, but the point comes from interpretation. An issue with moral relativity is the idea that people have their own agreed upon rights and wrongs. That viewing of what is right and what is wrong can impact individuals' way that they interpret a law. If it says you don't steal, okay, you don't steal, but is it wrong to steal from a company that's stealing people's time, money, and lives? Well, they're stealing, so isn't it okay for me to steal from the stealing to get it back? To some people, yes. To other people, no. Two wrongs don't make a right. Stealing is stealing. It's wrong. But that's why I say this is complicated. This is not an answer. This is not a question with an answer that's easy. The broad general strokes of all this that I want to emphasize before moving on is that in regards to policing. Understanding that ethics and morals are parts that shape individuals. They're things that make up who a person is, but they are also used by people to create laws, to create rules that people follow. That's important. Because if people made it, it means that they can change. It's understanding that people may not view things the exact way as you, and just because it's the way that's currently accepted doesn't mean it's the only way. Laws change. Ethics change. Morals change. People are not typically not static. They're not, forget the term now, but they're not things that don't change ever. They're things that move and adapt and learn. Ethics for policing is understanding that, number one, people are different. People are going to argue and fight, and some are going to be complicit and some are going to be aggressive, and you can't treat everyone with the same attitude because it's not going to work. That's the short and the sweet. The other part of ethics and policing is this, and we're going to talk about it in a second, but before we go any further, there's one other thing that's about ethics and psychology that I want to talk about. And the text does talk about it. This isn't a theory, but this is something that an individual did. So this is the Milgram experiment. Stanley Milgram in 1963 came up with a simple test to see how far people will go to obey authority. So the whole project is the obedience to authority. And so the image here is the basic layout that the textbook even provides of how the Milgram experiment worked. Okay? So Stanley Milgram put forward the idea that people will do things that they personally do not agree with, they do not believe in, that they are ethically opposed to, if urged by an authority figure. This is directly in response to World War II and the atrocities of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany, as well as several others. I want to emphasize, this is in the early days of psychological experiments before we got very specific on what is okay to do to participants. But Milgram's experiment was, you have a facilitator who is overseeing everything and is guiding the teacher who is teaching the learner. Those are the three basic components. Now, the observer and the learner are aware of the true nature of the test. The test subject is not the learner, but the teacher. Okay? This is the test subject. What Milgram did was he got a bunch of different people of different ages and backgrounds to test how well they will listen to authority. And what he did was they were put in a room where there was a wall separating the two. You could not see the other person. The wall was flat. There was no window, so you couldn't see, but it was thin enough you could hear between the two. There was also a speaker. Now, they were told that the learner was being attached to a cord that was directly connected to the teacher's board, where they would administer a jolt of electricity at 15 volts each time that the learner got something wrong. So the teacher would go through a list of words and terms, and the learner would have to repeat them back. Every time the learner got something wrong, the teacher was supposed to give them a shock of 15 volts. Every time they got something wrong, they had to increase the voltage by 15 volts, going up to a near lethal, not lethal, but really bad, could do some serious damage level of voltage. The reality was the learner may have been attached, but they weren't actually attached to it. There would be an electric current going through, and the person who was here would play a recording of an individual going through kind of responses. The textbook itself actually has the breakdown of what those sounds were. It was like a grunt, like, oh, oof. And it would eventually go as far as maniacal pleading and crying for help and to stop it. So this person was acting as if they were being electrocuted. This person was told to continue to give the voltage, and if they decided not to, this person, as the authority figure, would encourage them that it is part of the experiment, they signed up for it, and they had to do it. The experiment was, how far would this person go? And what would their cutoff be? And the results were terrifying. I'm just going to say that. Much like the Stanford prison experiment, which is another thing to talk about briefly that's not related to this. But they found that most people will give a severe, if not lethal, level of shock to another person if an authority figure tells them to. The idea that people will obey authority over their own personal beliefs was a terrifying result. Now, I want to emphasize there were people who stopped way before. There are people that did not go further than a couple voltages. Like, there are people who stopped. But the majority was an obedience to authority. And that was the findings of the Milgram experiment. And so, in considering ethical dilemmas and ethics in policing, understanding that police are seen as an authority figure to a lot of people means that policing has a lot of control. Because even though we know that this was a completely staged thing, they knew about it, they did not. The reality is a general majority of people. Now, you could not do the Milgram experiment today. I'm telling you that now. There's ethical boards that say you can't do that now. But it would be interesting to know if people would still do that in an era where police are not seen as the equal authority they once were. Again, it's hard to run that experiment ever again, but it's something worth thinking about. So that's the Milgram experiment. Like I said, if you're not familiar, there's another one that's also related to power and human nature, and that's the Stanford prison experiment. If you're unfamiliar with that one, they simulate a college professor and college-aged men participated in an experiment for Stanford University, where they created over the summer a prison situation, and they wanted to see the effects of human nature and how they fall into roles and things like that. Mind you, they were all everyday people. No one was any particular thing different, but the participants were separated into groups, whether they were a prisoner or a guard, and within 24 hours, power had gone to the head of the guards and corrupted them, and they acted as if they were authority figures, and that the other students and the other participants who were prisoners were actually prisoners, and they treated them terribly and unethically. And there was a whole bunch of this, and the experiment was supposed to go on for an extended period and only lasted 3 days. It's the classic example that people point to that shows that power corrupts people. That wasn't the necessary goal of the project, but it's what came out of it. But yeah, if you're interested, it is not for the faint of heart, but the Milgram experiment and the Stanley, wow, not the Stanley Parable. Sorry, my brain is there. But the Stanford Prison Experiment. Those two are both really good and interesting scientific debates and about ethics and people and authority. So anyway, ethics and policing. So we kind of already talked a little bit about this already, but this is just kind of going the next level. So I've talked about discretion and power already. That's kind of been the common theme. If you haven't noticed, discretion, power, why does law exist in the first place is not really, but power or force, public perception, discretion. Yeah. Discretion is a big component of ethics and policing. How far is too far? That's the basic question to ask, and that's the simplest way to get into the debate about police discretion from an ethical standpoint. How far is too far? How far can an officer go with their discretion? How much can they let slide? How much will they not let slide? These are all key components. So when we talk about ethics in policing and we talk about discretion, the question becomes, what is okay and what is not okay for police discretion to be about? Does it have to do with their discretion to use force in arrest? Is it their discretion to charge an individual or arrest an individual for a crime that's a non-major or non-violent crime? How do they use discretion? And then the other side is power. And of course, I can't help but show my comic book nerd and regular nerd colors here. With great power comes great responsibility. The way that police have power as an authority figure, as armed individuals in society, that is a lot of power. And the way that they use that power makes a difference. There is an ethics and a right and a wrong way of using that power. The textbook talks about free coffee. If an officer gets a free cup of coffee, how does that power dynamic work? Do they get that free coffee because they are seen as an authority figure, or are they getting that coffee because they've helped that business, or are they getting a free coffee? What is the reason for it? Is there a power dynamic? And so the other side of that is, much like with discretion, how do you use that power? Policing, ethics in policing is about maintaining a balance of your rights as an officer, your rights as a member of that community, and how that public perception is. And that's very important. We've talked about this before. Public perception is a key component of policing. If the general public does not believe the police is acting in their best interest and is not doing the public its service, there is legal recourse and ways to remove the police. Police can only be as effective as the community will let them. So, public service, walk the talk. Public perception matters. If you are holding people to a high requirement of ethics and morality, you too, as a police officer, must have high ethics and morality. So those are the three big ones. But I want to talk about gratuities in a second, is one I really want to emphasize. But I want to talk about lying and deception. So a common misbelief, thanks to a lot of Hollywood and whatnot has the back and forth between officers can lie or officers can't lie to get a confession and things like that. It, much like everything we talked about today, because it's ethics, it's not black and white. It's a very gray area. There is legally nothing stopping an officer from lying to you. Period. Nothing. The issue becomes, what is that lying used for? If it is clearly identified that there was an unjust and unfair lie that led to self-incrimination, yeah, that could be something that could be used in court to say it's tainted fruit from a tainted pool or from a tainted tree, and therefore all that evidence is unusable. Or it could very well be how the public perceives officers. They see that they lie all the time about particular things, and so they don't trust them anymore. A big component of surviving, not just as an officer, but as someone in the criminal justice field, is understanding that there is a level of deception that happens. Whether it's you doing it or someone else doing it or an suspect or a client or whatever, there's always going to be a level of deception. It's a thing about humans. We can't help ourselves. We are worried about the pain, so we go for the pleasure. So we lie to get out of the potential pain. It's a human thing. Notice how I'm trying to loop in all the things we've talked about? It's just to reemphasize that this is a complex system. Lying and deception is a big moral and ethical dilemma within policing itself. But the other one is related to this power dynamic and what I was giving the example with the coffee. Gratuities. If you don't know what a gratuity is some kind of payment on top of. So, yes, police officers, and much like most positions that aren't a volunteer position, you get paid for it. Gratuities are things on top of it. And a lot of jobs, including mine as a teacher, I want to emphasize that a lot of jobs have rules about gratuities. Teachers, educators in general, police officers, anyone who does any kind of like public service, doctors, politicians, things like that. There are rules in place that determine and say what amount of a gratuity can be accepted, what kind of a gift can be accepted. It's usually, it comes down to a monetary value. If it's under a certain amount, it's allowed. The reason for this is to avoid corruption. For teachers, there's rules about teachers taking gifts that are over a certain amount of money, whether it's a preschool teacher, kindergarten teacher, high school teacher, college teacher, whatever. Teachers can't accept gifts over a certain amount of money because it shows the idea that, well, the student can buy their grade, and that's not true, and that's not allowed, and that's illegal. So there's rules on gratuities. There's, like I said, doctors, you can't, give the doctor this huge amount of money just because, hey, you did this, because now it seems like a quid pro quo, a favor for a favor. Same with lawyers, things like that. Technically, we have that entire issue of gratuities currently with our Supreme Court and Justice Clarence Thomas. Thomas, if you're interested, just look into any of Justice Thomas's gratuities, and you'll see exactly what I mean. You can Google it, and you'll see plenty. But within criminal justice as a field, they are politics and criminal justice are very strictly like no gratuities allowed or very minimal. And it's because specifically with policing and with criminal justice, their job is to be morally neutral. They are meant to be the neutral party that helps keep things running securely. If the police are getting paid by a business to constantly be there, it gives the idea that that business is owed a favor by the police. That's unfair treatment. This is why gratuities matter. This is why when we talk in politics, we talk about political donors and everything, and a lot of those donations tend to be public. The private ones tend to be big corporations in large amounts. But the whole reason that we have this stuff that's supposed to be public information is to avoid the idea that there is unethical, unequal treatment. So, if I asked you to discuss a potential ethical dilemma in policing, you could talk about the police use of force in arrests. You could talk about police accepting gratuities from a local business or business person. You could talk about interrogation techniques and the use of lying and deception. You could talk about power balances. There are plenty of things that you can talk about policing that have ethical dilemmas. My goal with today's lecture is to give you the idea that, number one, no group, no person is immune from an ethical dilemma. This is something that people we deal with. It's who we are. Ethics are our personal beliefs in what's right and wrong, and because they're personal, they vary and they create problems. But number two, and the other thing that I really do hope you got from today's lecture, is that understanding how ethics works with society in general helps policing be a more efficient, a more equitable or equal system. That's the goal. That being said, that's today's lecture. I know it's a short lecture and a short presentation, but really the best way to get into ethics is to talk about ethics. And so I will tell you right now, I believe I said it in the intro video. If not, sorry about that, but this week's quiz is a 1-question essay. I'm asking you to write a 5-paragraph essay in which I'm going to ask you about a very particular ethical dilemma. And I'll tell you it right now in this lecture video, so you don't even have to open it. But I want you to start thinking about it. The police use of force in arrests. That is an ethical dilemma that modern policing and the general population, the way people observe it, the public perception, matters. Think about the way that police engage in arrests and the use of force in such arrests. Okay? That's the ethical dilemma that I'm putting forward to you. I am asking you to take a stance on the use of force in arrests. You can find out more by reading the exam question, the quiz question. But I'm telling you right now, think about the use of force in arrests. That's an ethical dilemma. Okay? That being said, thank you very much. Again, I know this video was shorter than the last couple, but look at that as a good thing because the last couple were like 2 hours long each. So enjoy this little bit of a shorter video. But by all means, because ethics is a complicated subject and has a lot of nuance and subtlety, if you are interested and you would like to talk about this more, please reach out to me as soon as possible. Email me, and I will be glad to set up either a live session through Zoom, through Microsoft Teams, through Blackboard Collaborate. I'll meet you at our West location. I'll meet you at one of our locations. I'll be glad to talk with you about this, but because this is such a complex subject, I'm putting it in your court. If you have questions, if you want more clarity on something, please reach out to me. I'll be glad to walk you through it. That being said, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.